Tell me your name, where you were born, and all of that other information.
Okay. I'm Pearl Sofair. I was born in Bombay, which is now known as Mumbai. My grandparents on my mother's side came from, my grandfather Ephraim came from Kirkuk. His name was Ephraim Kirkukli because he was from Kirkuk. My grandmother Lulu Bitana came from Baghdad. On my father's side, my grandfather Meyer Sofair was born on the Irrawaddy River as they were coming to Rangoon, and my grandmother Hannah was born in Rangoon. Their parents are all originally from Baghdad, and before that from Babylon, and before that 2,600 years ago from Jerusalem. My family consists of my mother Moselle Ephraim Sofair, my father David Meyer Sofair, and I have two brothers and a sister. My brother Abraham Sofair, my brother Isaac Sofair, and my sister Shoshana Sofair. I'm the eldest of four. Mom was also born in Bombay. Dad was born in Rangoon. And I lived in Bombay, my home city, shall we say, until the age of 17 and a half. So I speak Hindustani and English, which is how we spoke. We spoke both the languages. We never spoke Arabic in our house because my parents chose to use Arabic as their secret language. They were able to keep secrets about us and about business and about any kind of, I think, criticism they had of other people in the family or friends that they didn't want the children to know about. I also think because Zionism had occurred in 1948, we had a new state of Israel, there was this feeling that let's teach the children Hebrew instead of Arabic. And I'm sorry that I don't know more Arabic, but I do understand when I'm in the souk in Jerusalem what the vendors are saying and how I should approach their bargaining. They don't know that I understand what they're saying. At any rate, our origin is really back to Babylon, where, according to what I've read, it took the Jews a great deal of time to get to know the place. But that's where they started, basically they started Judaism. The Mishnah, the Gemara, the Zohar was written there. The Hebrew letters were written there. Many of our great thinkers are from there and Spain. And they conversed with each other. And they, as a result, the elders brought to us in Bombay this incredible heritage. This incredible heritage that I think we're very fortunate as the Sofair children to have been given, because we are part of that family of scribes who actually probably penned the Old Testament. I don't have proof of that, but I'm hoping that's the case. And as far as being in India, that was absolutely divine. Everyone who grew up in the Indian Raj of that time has a nostalgia and a sweet memory of how lovely life was. The Jewish community in India at one point were almost 1 million people in all of India. And most of them came from Baghdad, Babylon before. There were two other communities of Jews, the Ben Israel in Bombay and the Kochini, who are supposed to be descendants from the time of Solomon, because Solomon sent ships to China to find spices, and the ships crashed on the coast of Malabar. And the Jews stayed there and they took on the dress and the ways of the Indian people. They married Indian women, but they maintained their religion. The synagogues in Cochin are world famous, especially the main one on what's called Jew Street. And there are 4 other little synagogues in the environment there. And the Jews in Bombay, the Bnei Israel, are still in Bombay. They also are supposed to be from that time, of Solomon's time. And according to things I've read on the net, they're probably the closest connection to the time of Solomon of any Jews in the world today. They are practicing Judaism in the synagogues that the Sassoon family from Baghdad put up in Bombay. The Sassoon family came to India in the 1800s after the East India Tea Company had set up their business between India and the rest of Asia, mainly China. The Baghdadi Jews were smart. They're always looking for a place to expand their horizons. And the Sassoons were part of that group. And they became very successful. They put up synagogues. They set up a graveyard where every Jew could be buried free. They put up schools. They put up textile mills where Jews were hired. They started taxi companies for the Jews who didn't have educations. And the Kaduris did the same in China. The idea of Habra, which is giving, sharing, giving philanthropy, giving to someone who doesn't have, was inculcated in our being. We not only got it from the Iraqi Jewish background, we also got it from the Hindus of India and even the Muslims. If anybody went to any of these groups for charity, they never said no. There was never a no, period. You always gave if someone asked for charity. And even, I remember as a child, the Indian people who were poor would give charity to poorer Indian people when their child walked. When the child took their first steps, they would give charity. And they didn't take photographs of the child walking like we all do in the West. They gave charity. They didn't presume that that was to be taken for granted. So it was a different set of principles that we grew up with. I feel doubly fortunate for that cultural mix. There were other parts of the cultural mix that were difficult, like the evil eye, because the Muslims had it. The Hindus were very superstitious. And the Jews, of course, from Baghdad were extraordinarily superstitious. So it took most of us a long time to deal with our superstitions when we came to the United States and the West.
Okay, let's pause there for a moment.
Sure.
Go ahead. And by the way, you look at me, not at the camera, which is what you've been doing.
Oh, I have been doing that. Okay, I thank you for telling me that. When we asked my parents why we had moved, why they had moved, why they had come, basically they came because they were traders and they saw an opportunity for trade. And that was the Sassoons and the Kaduris and the Sofers. But many of the Jews from Iraq, Baghdad, Basra, Lebanon, that whole Middle Eastern area, Iran, they came to India and Asia because Israel had become a country. And before Israel became a country even, they had affiliations with Hitler. They were close friends of the Nazi regime during World War II. And in 1941, in fact, there was a planned Farhud, which is a pogrom. Farhud is the Arabic word for pogrom. There was a planned Farhud around the Mediterranean and all the major Middle Eastern cities. And they went and killed Jews. Now there was some idea and knowledge that this Farhud was going to happen because my mother's brother, Uncle David, who lived in Baghdad with his wife and 5 children, and he was a British subject, he was able to send his wife and 5 children to us in Bombay. He stayed on in the British compound. At that time, the British were having problems with the Iraqis because of this affiliation and closeness to Hitler. From what I've gathered, they killed over 150 some odd Jews that night. It's their comparison to Kristallnacht in Germany, but certainly in the Middle East, the Muslims never killed Jews as treacherously as the Jews were annihilated in Europe. I don't know why or what the circumstances were, but there wasn't that impetus of murder in their souls. There was also closeness between the Jews and Muslims in many, many, many places. And many Jews were saved by the Muslim brothers. They traded with each other. But in Baghdad, the Jew was still the third-class citizen. The first class was the Muslim, the second was the Christian, the third was the Jew. And by the time World War II was over, and then Israel, in fact, became an entity, a reality, many of the Jews in Baghdad decided it was time to leave. And at that time, I believe 120,000 Jews left Baghdad. Some of them surreptitiously, some of them in accord with the government, where they were able to take a suitcase of things, and that's it. And according to my cousins who lived in Baghdad, the Jews who left after them, they left right after World War II. They went to London, and they were able to sell their house. The other Jews had to hand the key of the house to a policeman on the street and say, "This is the key of your house now." That was what was the law. So they couldn't even get money for their property or anything. My grandfather in Kirkuk owned land that belonged now to, it belonged before to the British Oil Company. He had oil on his land. He was supposed to sell that, but there was a little funny story about that in the book I wrote, Baghdad to Bombay. And it's pretty hilarious and pretty awesome, because what happened was my grand-uncle went back to Baghdad to sell the land to the British. And he got involved with 2 young little girls, and the locals came and shot him to death. So the land was taken over by the British, and I don't think we've ever seen 1 cent of that oil. So that was our story of what we had to leave behind. Many of the Jews had to leave everything behind. The Jews who went to China, it's the same thing. My father's family, it was very interesting. They went for trade, and his mother's family had a real long-term view of life. They could see the future. And they came even before my father's family, my father's father's family, the Sofares. But according to my father's brother, Uncle Sassoon, who's still alive and lives in Israel, they walked by camel around the Himalayas, came down through Assam, And then Assam connects to Burma. And they came to Burma walking and came down through the Irrawaddy River on boats. And then Grandpa was born on the river. They were traders. They had big business in Scotch whiskies and wines, olives, kippers from Norway, and hunts, Del Monte. And Grandpa told me he came to the United States 3 times to visit the Del Montes and the Hunts. And at one time he told me that he thought that Oakland and Paris were the 2 most beautiful cities in the world. And there used to be a writer of the Chronicle named Herb Caen, and I told Herb Caen, and he put it in one of his stories. And when you look and see who the architects were of the city planning of Paris and Oakland, the same guy did Paris, Oakland, and Washington, D.C. with those round circles. There was a similarity. And at those times, Grandpa came before the great earthquake of 1906. And he was wined and dined royally, I'm sure. And he said everywhere when people went around in carriages, and quite classy group.
It's okay. Okay, go right ahead.
Yeah, but to go back to Baghdad, where my 5 cousins lived, first of all, we never even knew about them. When they showed up in 1941 in Bombay, it was just wonderful. But in 9 months, they went back home to their father and to their land and to their house and to their life. And they explained their life. It was very, very insular. They could only mix among the Jews. They were really not allowed to speak to anybody outside of the community, especially the girls. It would be dangerous. It would be, the evil eye would fall on them. If a Jewish girl spoke to a Christian or a Muslim boy, that's it. She probably wouldn't have a chance to be fixed up to get a good marriage. Their reality was they went to Jewish schools. They came home. They had a Jewish teacher, a Hebrew teacher, 5 days a week. Each one was schooled and taught how to pray out of the Old Testament and out of our prayer books. The boys, of course, were trained for bar mitzvahs. The women made the matzahs in each other's homes. Whoever had a big tanur, a big oven, they went, they mixed the dough together, they made the matzah for all the families who participated in baking for the whole week. They would shop with the abaya on, the black cover, in the markets, because that was how you were safe. And as I've mentioned in my book, it also was a good way to bargain because nobody knew who you were when you were bargaining. They have sweet memories as children, but they were ready to leave before their parents because one night I remember they told me they were locked in their school. This was during the World War II era. They were locked overnight in the school, in the Jewish school. None of the kids could go home. And the next day they came home and they said to their father, "We're out of here. We've got to leave." And my cousin Fred, who ended up in Boston at MIT, became a very excellent professor there of engineering. He said if he'd stayed in Baghdad, he would have had no future. Absolutely none at all. Unless you were a trader or a religious man of the book, there were very few things that you could really do. And the kind of terror that they felt was described by my cousin May, because she said when she was in London the first night, they didn't know where they were going. They found a place that they ended up in. And she said to me, I realized that night I had slept like a baby for the first time in years. She was young then. She was around 10 or 12. I don't remember exactly. But she said she realized that all the nights in Baghdad, she was scared. She never knew what was going to happen. So that's how they lived. They really lived on the surface of it, an ordinary kind of life, very protected, very insular, but there was this undercurrent of fear, constantly, this undercurrent of fear. They saw hangings in the town square. If people were being killed for something that they did, they hung them. And children could see people hanging in the corner of a square. And it was not an unusual circumstance. So that was kind of grim reality that they lived with. And they lived pretty simple lives, very simple lives. They weren't able to, for example, we had the same Hebrew teachers come to our houses in Bombay. We had the same insular lives, but we had friends from every part of the community, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Parsis, anybody, you name it, everyone saw each other. There was no difference. On Eid, the Jewish boys would go and eat with the Muslim guys, their friends, their buddies. So we didn't feel that contraction of spirit, shall we say. They were really contracted. They were in a tight circumstance. And they could never walk on the street like we could in shorts and go and play tennis in shorts at the club. They couldn't do that. They couldn't even be seen in a bathing suit. And we lived differently. We were much more emancipated. And I think it has to do with the British more in charge in India and allowing anybody who was in India that kind of freedom.
Very good. Thank you. Cultures.
When my grandparents came to Bombay, the Sassoons had set the foundation for the Iraqi Jews to come from Baghdad. As I said before, they started for the men who were not educated, because there were many poor Iraqi Jews who came. He started a taxi company. He taught them how to drive, and they became taxi drivers. Then he started a textile mill. My father ended up working for David Sassoon, and he ran all the shops of the textile mills all around India. They eventually became, the Sassoons became sirs in England. They were knighted by the Queen. And they had the freedom of the port in Hong Kong and Shanghai. So they were very, very important, and they had set a very strong foundation for everybody. As I said, they started schools, so the people who came had the schools ready, had the synagogues ready, and they got them jobs. And if they didn't have women, they would bring the women from Iraq and get them married. And even till today, among the Iraqi Jewish community, there will be conversation between one family and another with oceans in between about fixing up the children, because they like to keep that heritage strong. They don't want it to disappear. And it is a great heritage. I mean, they wrote the Zohar, and that's a pretty important stuff. They also naturally went to India because they had been doing business with India for many years before the East India Tea Company. They had been doing business all through the Mediterranean and India. And so it was a natural thing. My grandfather Ephraim Kirkukli, for example, his family did business in Africa, India, and the Middle East. He made fez caps. He sold horses to the Cossacks, Arab horses, and he made fez caps. He used to go to Czechoslovakia once a year and have the boxes of fez caps shipped, and then they would put them together in Bombay. And his biggest market was India, because India has the second largest population of Muslims in the world. And he also shipped them to East Africa and the Middle East. So there was a natural trade route that brought them there. There was a naturalness to it. It wasn't something imaginary. They had connections. They had trade connections already. And then when the Iraqis came, they went to Calcutta, they went to Ahmedabad, most of them stayed in Bombay and Calcutta. And they had wonderful communities. We had a Jewish club, Iraqi Jewish club. They all played cards every day, except for Shabbat. My father was a billiard player. They had a billiard group, and they all went to the races. There was a lot of gambling. I mean, the Middle East and Asia are gamblers. And here we were in India, where people gambled. I wrote about this. They used to gamble on the closing figures of the cotton market, the cotton figures in the stock market in New York, the closing numbers. That became known as the numbers racket. And the numbers racket was as well known in the Bronx as it was in Bombay. And the guys there would even bet on the numbers of the cars and the license plates. And recently, when I spoke in Kauai, a Hawaiian woman told me that the guys in Hawaii bet on the numbers of the license plates. So this numbers thing has been going on for years. The evil eye thing also, they brought with them. As girls, we were never told that we look good. Nobody ever said that business was good. Nobody ever said, my son got high grades, high marks in the exams. You never, ever said anything that was good, that's about your own family, that somebody could be jealous of. Because if they're jealous of you, you've asked for trouble. They put the evil eye on you, and then someone is going to get hurt in the family. And it was weird. And I made a very, very strong effort to, and I wasn't always successful, I'm sure, as a parent, but to compliment my children and grandchildren when they have shown effort and have shown ingenuity. And I've said that they look beautiful when they look beautiful. It was kind of weird to never get that kind of accolade, ever. But that's how we grew up. We were never told we were anything but you could do better. It was always you could do better. And we had to excel. We were pushed in the same way the Jews in America were pushed. We were a minority, we had to excel. And we were a fortunate minority because for some reason we were more educated than most minorities. We obviously were the people of the book, as they say. And here we were the sopheres, the scribes of the book. And education was the most important part of our being. Not that the girls could go to college, not that it was important for me. When I came to the States, I received a 4-year scholarship to Vassar because my grades in India were so high. And I wasn't allowed to go because nice Jewish girls are not allowed to go away to college. Of course, that's changed, thank goodness. But it was interesting at that time. After I wrote my book, Baghdad to Bombay, I have been going and giving book tours. Started at the Library of Congress and went on from there. The thing that amazes me the most is that people are totally unaware of Jews from India, of Jews in the Middle East. They connect Jews with Jerusalem. Some of the very religious Christians will connect Jews to Babylon because they know and they've read the Old Testament. But in general, it isn't as if there is any misconception about them. They can't believe that they even were there. What do you mean there are Jews in Lebanon, in Aleppo, in Cairo? Well, if you've read Durrell, then you've read about the Jews in Cairo. But how many people have read his books on Alexandria? You know, they don't know. There is a lack of knowledge. Most of today's world connects Jews to Israel. And that's good. Very few people realize how many Jews of the Middle East had to, as I've said, put the tent on the back and go. I call us the tent people. We were not Bedouins, but we have been like Bedouins. We have lived, just our own family, in three different places: India, England, and the United States. Other of my cousins have lived in India, Israel, and England, or Canada, or Australia, or south of France, or Scotland. I mean, we've gone in many directions. Jews from Syria I know on Valparaiso, are in the Caribbean, are in Brazil, they are in Argentina, they're South Africa. And of course, when Nebuchadnezzar took the Jews to Babylon, they were slaves. But after that, they were allowed to be full citizens and leave or stay. And some of them left and circled the Mediterranean at that time. So that was about 23 to 2400 BCE. And they also went up through Spain and Portugal. They went to Spain and they went up to the Dutch lands, and that's where the Jews ended up in Amsterdam. So their origins all are from the Middle East. And even the Jews of Europe are not aware, to some extent, of their heritage being from those places. It's been very, very fascinating to me when I go around and when I sing. And I sing with the Hebrew the way we say. We don't say va, we say wa for the vav, wow. And when we sing, we use wa instead of va. And then I'll be stopped. Someone in the audience will say, but you're saying it wrong. And I'll say, well, not really, you know. That's how we do it. This is how we pronounce the wa. So it's, and they also don't understand how much the Jews of the Middle East lost in real property. In India, they didn't. The Indian government, in my lifetime, in my mother's lifetime, in my grandfather's lifetime, never ever hurt our people. They were extraordinarily respectful and supportive. And when we took the Seferim out on Simchat Torah and danced in the streets with the Sefer, the Indians who saw us would clap on the street with us while we were dancing. As a girl, I first learned about anti-Semitism when I went to boarding school in England. I did not know it existed.
Okay, very good. So let me go ahead.
Another very important thing that our elders brought from Baghdad to Bombay for us to enjoy, besides our Hebrew and our religion and our magnificent heritage, was the food. Middle Eastern food, Arab food, is really delicious. In Israel, everybody goes to Arab restaurants because they're tasty. And what they brought with them were the Middle Eastern foods of the Arab countries. The mahasha, the hamin, or called tabit in Arabic, the bamia, the hamad, and we inculcated that into our lives. It was part of what we ate. It was part of our prayers. We always had tabit on Friday night because the men came home from the synagogue on Saturday and they ate the tabit, which is in Israel, it's called cholent, but it's different. It's the Middle Eastern way, it's different. And delicious. We use cardamom and just fresh vegetables. Everything has to be fresh and no beans in the rice. Anyway, what we did as a result of that, we also inculcated and brought into our cuisine the Indian food, the curries, the vegetables, the wonderful vegetables and the delicious spices, because they were right there. It was part of our heritage. And then when India became a separate country, of course we adored India. We sang Hindustan Hamara Hai, at the same time we sang the Hatikva, and in our family at the same time we sang the American songs. We left India. Most of the Jews from Baghdad originally left India to go to different countries. Most went to Israel, England, Canada, United States, and Australia. Those are the major ports that we embarked to. And it was amazing because when I did my book In the Kitchens of My Cousins, everybody has taken on food from other cultures. And I learned congee, which is a fish soup, which is like marag, which is a chicken soup from Baghdad. So the Hong Kong soup with fish and the chicken soup from Baghdad are so similar in their texture and in the reason why mommy makes it when kid gets a cold, when kid's not feeling up to par, or when you don't want the kid to get a cold or be not up to par. And it became a very important part of our whole life, and I think that's true of most people.
Good.
Yeah. When we started doing this recording, everyone noticed the elephant that's behind me. And I told the story that I had it brought to the United States when I went to India in 1969. At that time, my children were very young. And since that time, my children have all sat on this elephant. My grandchildren have all sat on this elephant. And now, even at this time, my 5.5-year-old granddaughter and my 2.5-year-old grandson sit on the elephant at this time, and they call him the heffalump. And he's become part of our family. And it's a strange thing to pass down as a gem of the family, but we have an elephant from India.
Mm-hmm. And you just say something about sort of you or...
The elephant in India is a very important creature that represented pomp and circumstance in India and fun. You would go to a zoo if you were lucky and had the money to pay for it, and you could sit on an elephant, and the elephant trainer would take you around the zoo and you visit all the animals in the zoo on your own elephant. that happened to me in Karachi, at the Karachi Zoo. And elephants were in all the major Hindu holidays. They would march through with the gods and goddesses, the idols that they put into the ocean in their prayers. And people sat on elephants. When Hindus got married, they sat on elephants and they marched through the streets. And the elephant was a sweet creature in India. I never met any wild elephants. So I remember them as very endearing animals. And when I saw this one in the bazaar in Bombay, and I had left my little kids home, I said, oh, I gotta have that. We gotta have that. We gotta send this back to, San Rafael, California from Bombay. And we packed it in a crate, and my cousin's husband shipped it out, and it came in perfect condition. And now it's it's hit the trail a few times, and a lot of the little pieces are hanging from it, but they're still sitting on it.